Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Milo album, A Toothpaste Suburb. Milo is a rapper whose roots lay back in Wisconsin, and this is his first full-length commercial project, which is kind of hard to think because I've been following this guy's music now for a handful of years, and it's been kind of a long, somewhat windy and rocky road to get to this point. Back in 2010 in Wisconsin, Milo was yet to really go solo and was still making music in the rap project Nom De Rap. But in 2011, that's when I heard of him. He dropped his I Wish My Brother Rob Was Here mixtape, which I totally loved. Then he put out an EP rapping over a bunch of Baths instrumentals that I wasn't that crazy about. But the following year is when he really came together, not only prolifically, but artistically, putting out music under the Scallops Hotel name, dropping music with Hellfyre Club, teaming up with Open Mike Eagle and Bus Driver and No Can Do. That was really coming out in a big way. And then he was coming out with great solo projects that fans and critics alike seem to be praising, like Cavalcade and his Things That Happen at Night, Things That Happen at Day EPs. You may remember those are my favorite EPs of last year. Milo's music was very slowly and very organically gaining a passionate audience and impressing the ears of child literacy advocates and ex-porn stars alike. And the fact that Milo would be able to appeal to such a wide audience is not really surprising, considering that in his music he comes off very clever, funny, humble, likable, smart, and deviously nerdy. It's funny to think of how many MCs are out there right now marketing themselves and pimping themselves out as being different, breaking the mold in hip-hop. I'm not your typical rapper. But to me, Milo right now really is that quintessential anti-rapper. And he could be dethroned one day, but there aren't many MCs, in my opinion, that as hard are working against the self-centeredness and the brags and the materialism, the aggression and the attitude. And the few people who could compete with him on that level, he's already collaborating with them on this record. And with these collaborators, instead of hip-hop stereotypes, Milo offers vulnerability, abstractions, philosophy, an endless gauntlet of references to sci-fi, RPGs, and pop culture, and a rap flow that borders on calming spoken word, and a lyrical style that seems to emphasize the idea of just stream of consciousness, free subject association, rather than a clear theme or concept or storyline. Sonically, the aesthetic of this project isn't really that too far off from what Milo was doing on his Things That Happen EPs. To produce, he brings on Igloo Ghost, Taste Nothing, Grey Hat, and of course, once again, Riley Lake. And together they assemble a group of instrumentals that not only are very ethereal and are very lush and colorful, but have a bit of a West Coast flavor to them too. Like, these guys are really pulling from Flying Lotus and that whole Brain Feeder camp, maybe a little bit of James Blake too. There are lots of punchy, off-kilter beats, very vibrant synthesizers from rich chords to very bubbly bleeps and bloops. There are tons of effects laid into these instrumentals too. I think by the end of this record, the instrumental tone of this album does get a little old, it does get a little stale. It's not like there's a ton of variety across these beats. Even the ones that hit hardest are fairly gentle and aren't really that poppy. Nearly every beat here has kind of a relaxed vibe to it, but some songs are softer, more subtle, more beautiful, more ethereal, and others are a little more dry and tangible. But in terms of the lyrics, it's a little bit more difficult to come together with a summation, even though this record does start off with a really clear idea. The opening track here starts off with a bit of a story, Milo talking about moving into his first apartment on the West Coast, his first apartment in general. I'm not totally sure, but he's talking about the life he's leading at this point, rusty dollar store pots and pans, living broke, borrowing a preamp from Open Mike Eagle, really tiny, insignificant, mundane things that in isolation would be totally uninteresting, but Milo finds a way to pull them together into a pretty good song. There are even some funny lines that turn up, one where he says that he couldn't afford cover art from folk artist Clementine Hunter. There's a little mantra that Milo repeats a few times at the end of the track too, but it doesn't really pull the song together. But how could this little lyrical repetition pull this entire track together? It's not like a package. It's not a box. It's a bunch of little trinkets just all strewn about. Toward the middle point of the instrumental, things seem to go really ethereal for a moment. Milo starts whipping out these lyrics that seem to deal in violence and abuse toward black people, talking about media lies, a lot of stuff that seems to be pretty relevant given the recent events in Ferguson, Missouri. It's a really heartfelt moment in the song, and for sure an authentic expression of what Milo feels on this topic. However, this moment in the track doesn't really have much more weight than any other moment in the track or any other moment on this record, because it's mentioned, it's approached with the same brevity that nearly everything else on this album is. I think the mental state of this record can be boiled down to a single line in Milo's lyrics. One where he says he was going to learn the keyboard and write several ballads, but instead at a cookout he got lost in the tater salad. Listening to A Toothpaste Suburb is a lot like reading a series of diary entries and bits of poetry from someone who has a severe inability to focus on anything. And Milo's inability or refusal to focus is only emphasized by this record's lack of hooks and Milo's sort of monotonous flow and voice. And when Milo does try to write hooks, they can be a little hit or miss. Some I like, we can eat great clumps of sky. But others, like the song Argyle Socks, which features one of the harder beats on the record, there are a bunch of harp samples, bus drivers going wild on the hook. This instrumental is a freaking mess. But to mention Bus Driver, he dropped an album recently. I loved that record, and a lot like Milo, he seems to avoid just delivering a simple, straightforward song structure, and when he does, he really does something weird and progressive in the process. He really does it on his own terms. Milo also tries to opt out of traditional structures, but he offers very little in their place. For sure, a lot of these beats, instrumentals, tracks are linear in structure. We're sort of getting this one spot, and then in the middle there's a significant change, goes into something completely different. But a lot of these changes, a lot of this beauty, a lot of what makes these songs intriguing from beginning to end has much more to do with the instrumentals than it does with Milo. Almost every single line on this project, no matter how good it is just dust floating in Milo's breath, because each line builds off of and builds up to nothing. It's like I'm listening to a melancholy punchline rapper with way too many inside jokes and whose sense of humor ranges from dry to incredibly immature. The beginning of A Toothpaste Suburb is really great. I think this album kicks off well, and maybe that's partially because the fact that Milo doesn't offer much lyrical guidance through these songs, it's yet to set in. But it's the back end of this album that I think ends up really lacking, especially starting with the song Just Us. I mean, you know, I can't step in and say how you should or should not tribute a friend, but to me, this revision of this song doesn't really live up to the original in any way, shape, or form. However, this is one of the few songs that actually focuses on a topic and delivers some really personal accounts of a very significant moment in Milo's life, and that alone makes this track so much more enjoyable than many of the other songs in the track list here. The end of this record doesn't feel any more significant than the beginning of this record. It's just all really so uneventful, in my opinion. And it's not that Milo is a one-dimensional rapper or a one-dimensional artist. It's just that I think he goes about addressing all of these dimensions so haphazardly and so quickly and so effortlessly and so insignificantly that at the end of the day, it all sounds like it's just one dimension. There's some great beats on this record. A lot of the rhymes are endearing. Milo still has a personality that I think is enjoyable in music, but a lot of the things that at the start of his career made him kind of stand out and made him different on this project are now starting to limit him a little bit, I think. I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this LP. Transition, if you've given this record a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, A Toothpaste Suburb, forever.